Did you know that in the middle of one of the deadliest conflicts the world had ever seen, enemies put down their guns, walked into the open and shook hands with the very people they were trying to shoot just 5 minutes earlier? It sounds like the setup to a bad Joker German, a Brit and a Belgian walk into no man's land. But this actually happened. It's a story that feels almost too incredible to be true, a flicker of humanity in the darkest of times. The year is 1914. Europe has been plunged into a war that everyone swore would be over by Christmas. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Instead, millions of soldiers were bogged down in a sprawling network of muddy trenches that stretched from the Swiss border all the way to the North Sea. This was the Western Front, and it was a special kind of hell. For months, the fighting had been relentless. The landscape between the trenches, a place they grimly called no man's land, was a frozen, blasted wasteland. It was a chaotic mess of mud, craters, and barbed wire where the constant threat of death hung in the air. For the soldiers huddled in their waterlogged trenches, survival was the only thing on their minds. The misery was unimaginable. But as Christmas approached, something truly strange started to happen. It began with a sound. German troops started placing small Christmas trees and candles along the tops of their trenches. Then they began to sing. The familiar notes of Still No Hat or Silent Night drifted across the frozen battlefield, across no man's land. British soldiers heard the carols, and instead of opening fire, they started singing back in English. Imagine that for a second. Two armies who had been trying to kill each other for months were now having a cross-battlefield carol session. It was the 1914 version of shouting, "Hey, what's up?" to your neighbor. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, an unspoken calm began to settle over certain parts of the front. Some officers on both sides gave unofficial orders. Fire only if you're fired upon. It was a live and let live policy, and it didn't come from the generals sitting miles away in comfortable headquarters. It came from the soldiers themselves, the men who were exhausted by the cold, the mud, and the constant fear. They were tired of the war, and for just a little while, they wanted a break. When dawn broke on Christmas Day, the unimaginable happened. Unarmed German soldiers started climbing out of their trenches. They walked into the open, waving their hands and calling out, "Merry Christmas." In broken English, at first, the British soldiers were suspicious. Was this a trick? A trap to lure them out into the open? But then, they saw that the Germans weren't carrying rifles. They were carrying gifts. And that's when something truly remarkable happened. The British soldiers climbed out of their trenches too. In the middle of no man's land, the very ground that was designed to be a killing field, enemies met as men. They shook hands, they shared what little they had: cigarettes, chocolate, tins of food, and even plum puddings sent from home. They exchanged souvenirs like buttons from their uniforms and hats. It was a surreal, almost magical scene. Some accounts describe soldiers from opposing sides working together to bury their dead. For weeks, the bodies of fallen comrades had been left tangled in the barbed wire of no man's land, impossible to retrieve under a hail of machine gun fire. Now, in this temporary peace, Germans and Britons helped each other carry their fallen friends and give them a proper burial, reciting prayers together over the graves. And then there's the most famous image of the Christmas Truce, the one that has become legendary, the football match. Yes, it really happened. In several places along the front, soldiers kicked a ball or, sometimes just a tin can or a bundle of straw around in the frozen mud. While historians debate just how organized these games were, letters from soldiers confirm that these impromptu kickabouts definitely took place. It wasn't the World Cup, there were no referees or scoreboards, but it was a game. For a few brief moments, they weren't soldiers trying to kill each other, they were just guys having fun. The language barrier didn't seem to matter. They used gestures, broken bits of English and German, and shared laughter. They showed each other pictures of their families, their sweethearts, and their homes. They talked about their lives before the war, the English villages, the German marketplaces, the Belgian towns they had left behind. For a short time, the war just stopped. It wasn't just the absence of bullets. It was the return of something they had all forgotten, their shared humanity. Think about it. You're in the worst place on earth, surrounded by mud and death, and suddenly the person you've been ordered to kill is waving at you and wishing you a Merry Christmas. The sheer surreality of it must have been overwhelming. But not everyone was celebrating this miracle on the battlefield. When news of the truce reached the high command on both sides, they were furious. Generals worried that if their soldiers saw the enemy as fellow human beings, it would destroy their will to fight. How can you order a man to kill someone he just shared a cigarette with? Stern orders were sent out. This kind of fraternization was forbidden and must never happen again. And it never did, not on this scale. By Christmas 1915, the war had become far too brutal and mechanized. The introduction of poison gas, the massive artillery bombardments, and the staggering number of casualties had poisoned any chance of a spontaneous peace. The hate had become too deeply ingrained. So, did they really play a full-on football match with teams and a proper score? Probably not. It was more like a series of small, informal kickabouts. But whether it was a structured game or just a few guys kicking a can around, the symbolism was powerful. In a world that was literally designed for killing, these men chose to play it. That's the image that captured the public's imagination when newspapers back home finally broke the story. The Christmas Truce of 1914 remains one of the most poignant and powerful moments in modern history. It was a brief, beautiful pause in one of the bloodiest chapters the world has ever known. The letters sent home by the soldiers who lived through it make it clear they knew they were part of something extraordinary, something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Here's the final twist. The generals feared the truce would undermine morale and shorten the war, but many historians now argue the opposite. They believe the war dragged on for 4 long years, precisely because soldiers were eventually conditioned to hate through propaganda and orders, not through their own personal feelings. For one brief moment on Christmas Day, ordinary men followed their hearts instead of their orders. They chose goodwill over gunfire, and that's why, in the middle of a conflict that claimed millions of lives, a few hours of peace, a shared song, and a simple game of football became more meaningful than all the months of fighting that surrounded it. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, our shared humanity can shine through. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from history. See you next time.